Oh, my goodness, we're up already. Let me wait a minute and make sure that I can get the live stream on my laptop. I'm set up again like I was the other day so that I can get into the chat without having to move in on the phone camera there. So give me just a minute to make sure that this is going to go up just the way I'm hoping it will. It should work, but we will see. Seems like it takes a little bit of time for me to get this thing up and running. So let's see where we are here. Of course, I thank you for letting me know I'm 5x5. I'm not sure why this takes a minute for. I try to get it set up beforehand, but this is one of the things we're going to have to wait on as I get these things moving along, I suppose. It's been another crazy day. I watch what's happening. Of course, this whole balloon debacle has been absolutely disgusting. As I put up in my video on Saturday, I'm really not sure what's going on there. I'm not certain if it's. I'm not showing this is coming up on my computer, so maybe we're not going to be able to do this tonight the way I was hoping we'd be able to. There we go. Okay, it's finally there. It took it a minute. I'm not sure why it does that. You'd think it's once I'm live there, you all are seeing it obviously because you're already on there getting on the chat, and yet this thing just doesn't quite catch up for some reason. I'm not sure why, but at any rate, there we are. So it's working now. So I'll be able to get into the chat when I need to. So welcome everybody as you come in. Today is the 5th of February, 2023. I'm Roy Potter, of course, and getting back on the subject of the balloon debacle. I really don't know what to say. This entire thing with China, I think, is a pretense. I mean, we have people in our government who love China, who have invested in China, who have, like Hillary Clinton saying that China's real smart. They've done a lot of good things. We had, the Clintons selling some of our ballistic missile secrets to China. We've basically, been well, they're a big trading partner. General Mark Milley not only said that they're not our enemy, but just a great producer of goods, but he also, as we all know or should know, called up his counterpart in China when Trump was in office. And Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told his counterpart in China that he would let him know if we're going to, attack them and all this. Anyway, we also know the Biden's ties to China and lots of other politicians. I mean, we could go on and on. Dianne Feinstein, Eric Swalwell as well, on and on and on. And yet, with this war in Ukraine, they're kind of starting to try to shift, saying that China's really our major enemy. you know, the big takeaway here, I think, ladies and gentlemen, is to keep you off balance, to keep the American people and a lot of other people around the world off balance as to who the real enemy is. And I'm not saying that China isn't a problem for us. I don't know what that balloon was doing above us, but it obviously had the Chinese, who have basically admitted now that it's theirs. Um, they had someone in our government who covered for them while that balloon was traversing our territory, our airspace. Uh, so, who knows what's going on? China broke into our uh, Office of Personnel Management and took a lot of information from government employees, especially those who would have security clearances and things like this. This is a number of years ago. Um, how did they get in there and who let them do it? Oh, they were just smart enough to get in. Well, as I've said, I think that there's something more going on here. China is just another way, I think, with the neocons and the people that do so much subterfuge, empire building, lies and deceits in our country in D.C. there. Just another way to keep you off balance and to keep you from realizing that the real enemy that they have is us, the regular American people. So just keep that in mind as you watch all of this. I was very disappointed in Senator Rand Paul's answer to this whole balloon situation, and of course, just everything. I don't think we have anybody up there that's really willing to call it the way it is, and any hope that that's ever going to change, I think, is very small. As I've said, I think that there have to be some. I'm going to use some veiled language here, okay? Because I say this kind of thing a lot. There's going to have to be some major disassembly and changes in the United States before anything in the world stage gets fixed, and that includes here. Okay, you say I'm 5 by 5. That's great. I appreciate that. I don't know. I didn't notice if any of my mods are here. I never tell them. You know, I just kind of pop on, and there we go. Let's just go ahead and move on in. I could talk about the state of the world. You know, the Ukraine situation, of course, is getting more and more serious all the time. And you might wonder about the title of this video. Well, you'll kind of see as I move along. I'm going to tie a lot of things together here. And again, you don't have to believe anything I say, but I'm throwing things out here for your consideration. I've been very active on Twitter in the last 24 hours or so. And like I said, I was kind of backing off of YouTube and Twitter, but I had some individuals ask about the situation with the origins of Christianity, the translations of the scriptures into different languages, particularly from the Greek and the Hebrew into Latin and then into German and all that. We're going to kind of talk about that, why that's impacting what we're seeing happen in the West today. But at any rate, one of the people said, gee, thank you for revealing the truth. You're a truth teller. And I just want to caution everybody up front here, okay? That I don't consider myself a truth teller. That's not, I mean, who knows the truth? I consider truth to be something that's absolute, not relative. And I mean, I can say some truths, you know, male and female, you know, things like that, which is now even a matter of contention. I see that Jackson Hinkle has been attacked because of his stand on LGBTQ stuff and some other things by some organizations because of his stand on that. So, as he put out today, the fact that we might all get vaporized in a nuclear war does not take precedence over these silly social constructs that are so common in our very evil and dysfunctional, debased society today. So at any rate, I'm not a truth teller. My goal, my intent is to bring to you information that has been repressed, suppressed for thousands of years, hundreds and thousands of years, not hundreds and thousands of years, hundreds of years and thousands of years, so that it makes it harder for you to navigate your life and to try to discover what really matters. And all this has been done by design, even though there are a lot of people who say, well, our history is totally false. You know, there was Tartaria and, you know, and I agree, our history, I'm a historian by training, not just law enforcement and military, but I also know that they're just in the extant history that we have today, you can see these evidences of changes and fairy tales, basically, so that the powers that be can shape their societies, their world at the time, their worldview into what they want it to be. And the truth is often, because it is a war, when they do that, a war on you and a war on truth, truth is the first casualty of war. That's true in history and the study of history as it is, even with the study of the scriptures, which I have often pointed out, and we're going to get into some of that today. So at any rate, those of you who don't want a spiritual discussion from here on in, we're going to get into some spiritual matters. It is going to impact, as I said, what's going on in the Western world today, especially in Europe and in the United States. The American Anglo Alliance, NATO, and all that's going to impact all that, and I think you'll see why I decided to do this today. So this is going to be a rather lengthy presentation. I do hope to get to the chat though here during this. Right now, though, you can put your questions in there. The people that are putting them in there right now, I don't know that I'll ever get to those. But let's go ahead and jump in and see what's going on. As you can see, I titled this Gutenberg, Apple or Pear, and the U.S. war on Europe. Today, Redacted put out a video which was basically a rundown of what's happening with this whole thing in Ukraine and with China and all of it really. And they had a piece. I don't know if she had actually been interviewed by them, but there was an excerpt from a video, either from their interview or whatever else, with Catherine Austin Fitts. If you know who she is, she was in the federal government at one time. She's a financial whiz analyst. And she basically admitted, as I have and many other people, that the U.S. is actually at war with Europe. They're trying to take Europe down. And I don't know what's wrong with those Europeans that they just do this. I don't know if they've been paid off, threatened, probably a mixture of a lot of those things. And some Europeans are starting to wake up to the fact that this whole thing is to their destruction that the U.S. has been doing so that the U.S. can keep their world control. Anyway, Catherine Austin Fitts admitted that as she, I guess, was talking with Clayton Morris of the Redacted. And I tweeted that out, and I think I put it, maybe I didn't get it onto the community posts above. Maybe I didn't. But that's kind of the crux of where I'm going to take this today and show you how this is basically developed. And it's not going to be in depth. It's not going to be exhaustive. But I want you to see how the interpretations and the powers that be, how they've given you the interpretations of Scripture and basically trained you to read the Scriptures in a certain way to their benefit, and how that's moved on into what the intelligence communities and the powers that be have done to basically control the thought processes, the thinking processes, and even the questions asked by the members of the people of the United States and the people of Europe and a lot of countries as well. It's been the same process, which is again why I say that I've concentrated so hard on the male-female relationship, because it's at the crux of all this. The basic truths are, and I'll say it here, I don't think they'll toss me off for this. The basic truths that are obvious are men and women. Okay, that's a basic truth that you can't. Anybody that tries to deny that, there's an agenda going on there, and that is a truth that has no relativity. It's an absolute truth. And there are others that we could probably discover, but we're prohibited from doing that because of the way they've trained our minds to think, or actually not to think, not to have the right critical thinking to view these things in the light that we really should. So at any rate, with that little introduction, I wanted to get to this thing with Gutenberg. Now, I've been in these conversations, especially on Twitter, more than anywhere else, and I talked about this on my last video, where I was even called a heretic, and and like I said, calling somebody a heretic is just an empty term, a pejorative used to label somebody who doesn't agree with you. Frankly, a lot of the people that call people like myself heretics, the people that do that name calling or that pejorative identification, in fact, they themselves, in most cases, are working off of information that's in error. And I'm surprised at the number of people, the intelligent people that fall into that category, but they're really there. And it's those same kind of people that were drawing and quartering, crucifying, um, burning at the stake, cutting out entrails, cutting off genitals, and those types of things to people that they thought went against the orthodoxy. So they became the persecuted, became the persecutor, and that's always the way it is. And that whole thing has transferred now into the U.S., where those who love liberty are the ones that are considered to be the heretics. Have you seen how they've done that? Well, they've done that over the thousands of years. It's a standard procedure that they use. So the same way that they labeled people that were searching for truth to be heretics because they didn't go along with the orthodoxy, are the same techniques that they're using in the United States to now attack you if you stand for liberty. You know, the Bill of Rights, for instance. It's the same process, and that's why I can see it very plainly, because I've studied these things for so long. So at any rate, I bring up Johann Gutenberg because he's the guy who invented the Gutenberg press. And because of him, the very first book that he printed, apparently, was the Bible. And it took him quite a while. And he basically published what's known as the Latin Vulgate. Now, Gutenberg freed up the scriptures from a very small, controlled group of people to a larger audience. One of those who got a hold of this Vulgate was Martin Luther. And then he translated it from Latin to German. Okay, and of course he was the guy who started the Protestant Reformation. Wrote up his 95 Theses and tacked it to the wall of one of the cathedrals about the problems that the Catholic Church, its corruptions, especially things like paying for indulgences to get into heaven and stuff like that, which a lot of that and a lot of the things with the Inquisition are conveniently ignored by Catholics today, even in my discussions with priests, who some I know quite well. But at any rate, so the Gutenberg press got the Bible out, and initially, even prior to that, but especially now, those Bibles were chained to the pulpit, and it became a common idea that the reason why the scriptures, the Gutenberg Bible, and like I said, there were some other manuscripts before that, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, but they were chained to the pulpit in the churches. This idea was so that nobody could read it. And that's been attacked by many, especially Roman Catholic apologists, who say that that wasn't the reason, that the real reason was because they were afraid that the scriptures might be stolen. That's actually a legitimate defense of chaining the few copies of the Bible to the pulpit. But the fact of the matter is, it was also to keep it from being widely read by the lay people of the church, even some of the clergy, so that the interpretation could be spoken from the pulpit and nobody could check it. So a lot of error came into the church early on, even before the time of Jerome, before his Vulgate translation. But at any rate, the whole idea is that the people, the lay people of the church, the larger number of people, would just basically believe what they're told without any other critical thinking, because there was nothing to compare it to. People didn't even know how to read then, so having the Bible, chained to the pulpit, a lot of people couldn't read anyway, so it was almost like, what difference does it make? But as people began to learn how to read, having access to that Gutenberg Bible and its subsequent translations like Luther, started to open people's minds that they had been maybe not told the entire truth of the matter, that they were being dictated to about what to think rather than letting them learn, those who were honest with themselves and righteous, learn on their own and apply the correct principles. Okay, so but the powers that be didn't want that. And this went way back. It was evident, in my book, The Crimson Thread, I showed evidence of this in the Roman Empire with their information war, which is what it was, a propaganda war against the Messianic movement, which is incorrectly called Christianity. I could get into the history of that. When Rome called these people Christians and Christus and all of that, in Latin, Christ just means Messiah, which means for the Romans it meant king. So it was somebody, they looked at it as being an insurrection. Anyway, I get into that in some of my religion series. But the point that I want to make here is that there was a lot of ignorance about what the scriptures actually said, and the Gutenberg Bible got that out to where people were starting to ask questions. But of course, as a result of that, anyone who raised questions and certainly put forth a different idea on what the scriptures are saying were considered a heretic. And I've talked about one of those ad infinitum, the idea of men and women, the marriage, and also even the marriage of Jesus himself, which the Messiah, and as I pointed out in a Twitter thing, and I've said a lot here on YouTube, if the Messiah was not married, that would be a reason to, if the person who claimed to be the Messiah was not married, that would be a reason to reject them. Okay? And so the Messiah had to be married. It was one of those things, sorry, it's just the way it is. And I've shown that to some extent, not to the greater extent that I could, but I've talked about Psalms 45, for instance. I could go into a lot more detail on a lot of other things, but that's kind of the basics. That's one thing, for instance, that became an object of whether you're being involved in. Yeah, that's right. The first Gutenberg Bible, thank you, Liza Jean, was first published in 1455. By the way, Gutenberg was persecuted for that. At first, it was lauded by the Catholics. Then he became persecuted by it, and unfortunately, he lost his fortune. There were some disagreements with his partner, and then eventually, there was I think it was a bishop of the church who really did appreciate what he did, and then put him up and protected him, helped him get at least to live without being a total pauper. But that's what happens to people that try to bring out the truth. It happened to Jesus. It happens to Gutenberg. You know, it happens to, let's say, well, there could be any number of people we could use today. I'm probably a good example of that myself. But at any rate, so basically, this entire thing was blown wide open with the Gutenberg Bible, and the people started realizing that they had been lied to for 1,400 years plus. And that's really what drove the Protestant Reformation. And the Catholics, the trad Catholics in particular, get really upset about that. They want to say that Luther was a heretic. And then, even though, you know, in my situation, these Catholics called me a heretic because, you know, I pointed out this thing, of course, like with the marriage, you know, situation. They don't like stuff like that because it goes against the early church. But at any rate, so that process of revealing the truth and then being subjected to persecution, number one, and number two, interpretations based, you know, hidden in the translations, so that you don't realize that you're getting not the exact situation, enabled people, especially the clergy and those in power, political power, to manipulate the people. And they did that very well during the medieval times. And as I said at the beginning of this video, we see that today. For instance, the propaganda that you see that you need to get the OWS, for instance, right? And how many people fell for that? 2/3 of the United States at this point, and billions of people worldwide. So it's not something that doesn't happen. It's quite common, actually, and it takes a very strong-willed person who's willing to look at the truth to what was that? To oh, I should be looking on here. Oh yeah, Black History Month. Yeah. Anyway, so they have this down to a science as far as controlling our thoughts and even what we talk about. So one of the things I wanted to mention here, and as I said, this is going to be kind of a spiritual discussion too, and I'm going to get into some specific scriptures. Sorry, my eyes are a little dried out. I've got the heater right on me because it's quite cold out. We've had snow and wind today, but I also had to open the window because it was a little too warm. So there we are. So at any rate, I point out here apple or pear, and you say, well, why would you do that? Well, you remember Jesus in the Gospels, you know, he's hungry, and he puts forth his hand to a fig tree, but the fig tree didn't have any fruit on it. And so he cursed the fig tree, and it withered away. I hope you all remember that story, okay? That's just an example. I want to home in on that because there are a number of lessons there. Most And I'm not saying that this interpretation is wrong. It's just that it's too narrow. Most preachers, sermon ministers, even just regular lay people will say, well, what that's talking about is you need to have good fruit from you. You can't do evil things. You have to do good things. But in fact, it was much more involved in that, and it goes back to the marriage situation. Everything does, even the allegories of Jesus and the church being in marriage. All of these things show you how important this marriage is. So he didn't curse the fig tree because it was a fig tree. He cursed it because it was not bearing its fruit in the physical world. Yes, it has some applicability to our spirituality, to improving ourselves, having faith and doing good. But this is happening in the physical world. As I've so often said, the spiritual and the physical are connected. You don't have one without the other, despite what the spiritualists will tell you. They really like homing in on the flesh, right? And I've given you a lot of information on that. It's even evident in the New Testament, this flesh thing, and yet it was flesh that was in the Garden of Eden when Adam's rib was taken from him. It talks about the flesh was separated, the rib taken out, and then the flesh closed up, and then from that the woman was made. That's allegorical, but still the flesh existed in the immortal state in the Garden of Eden. But they want to denigrate it. Everything could be misused. As I've said, it's righteousness is the right use of something, and unrighteousness is the wrong use of something. But at any rate, so where this goes now is that the situation in this tug of war on how to interpret what's happened, especially in the scriptures over the years, has gotten to the point where it's been very divisive. And that was all done on purpose because it's easier to conquer people when you divide and conquer, right? It's easier to take care of that. And those in power had reasons for pushing this idea that the man-woman relationship was dirty. Anyway, where I'm going to go with this is a little further and say, and this is going to be something that some people will object to, but Jesus didn't, as I just said, didn't curse that tree for being a fig tree. He cursed it for not bearing good fruit. So what do I mean by apple or pear? I'm going to put forth the idea, even though I realize the scriptures say, wide is the gate and narrow, and wide is the way that leadeth unto the deaths, right? And narrow is the gate, and narrow is the path that leadeth unto eternal life. In other words, there are few there be that find it. And a lot of people think that means, well, you have to be in a certain doctrinal, dogmatic, or even a specific church, okay? And that's not what it means. What it means is it has to do with sanctification. Sanctification. So, here was a fig tree that wasn't bearing fruit. Well, what if it had been an apple tree? Or a pear tree? Or an olive tree? A fig tree doesn't do exactly the same thing that an apple tree does. Or the same exact thing that a pear tree does. Or the exact same thing that an olive tree does. But they're not cursed for being those things. They're on slightly different paths. The important thing is that they're bearing good fruit. Not some nefarious spiritualized belief, but in actuality, in the physical world, which is a mirror of the spiritual world, because they're combined. So, in other words, an apple tree might not be a fig tree, but as long as it's on the proper path to produce, to be fruitful, even if the fruit is somewhat different than the fig tree, it's still accepted. And it can receive a sanctification and be an apple tree. It follows through its path, and because it's performing what it was supposed to do, In essence, it's asking for sanctification by God, who recognizes it even though it's not like everybody else, but to its understanding, to the level that it is, it's sanctified, and as long as it's bearing that fruit, it gets to go on, okay? We're the same way. The fruit that God expects from us is the right use of things, righteousness, the two great commandments, loving God and loving your fellow man, and how you interact with that. All the dogma and the doctrine becomes points of disagreement, contention, arguments, even sometimes wars, when there's really nothing wrong with that person over there on their path. They're there and God will work with them, and if their fruit is good, even if they're not asking for it consciously for sanctification by God, God will give it to them. Doesn't matter if they're a fig tree, an apple tree, or a pear. In our belief systems, as long as we don't reject something that's pretty obvious to us, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't want to give a specific thing. Of course, one of the things that I talked about is this man-woman relationship. I think that's pretty obvious. As long as you're on a path to discover righteousness, yeah, the two great commandments. Hi, Jesse. Nice to see you here. God's not going to hinder you, because if you're honest, you're going to be searching for the truth, and He can lead you to that. And some people say, well, yeah, so you have to become Catholic because God's going to lead you there, or you're going to have to become Mormon because God's going to lead you there, or you're going to become Baptist. No. It's going to be a personal thing between you and God, just like it was between Jesus and that fig tree. Okay, so you're looking for sanctification. That's really what we're looking for, is that we choose whatever, for instance, our marriage relationships, how we set those marriage relationships up, just as an example, because it's the most important thing we can do, frankly. How we set that up, it might not go along with this group over here or this person over here, but as long as we're choosing righteously, and I'm talking about the man-woman relationship, okay? All right? If you choose that and you choose to do it righteously to the best of your ability, God's going to sanctify your arrangement, as long as it doesn't go against the basic principles of truth. You might be a little different than everybody else, but you don't care. You're looking for the sanctification of that, and because of that, you're going to do it as righteously as you can, to follow that narrow path, but within the fact that you're an apple tree, not a pear tree. And I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. Sanctification is really what you're trying to obtain. Okay? A lot of people aren't going to agree with that. That's all right. Just think about it. Just think about it. It's like I said, there are probably Aborigines in Australia. There are probably indigenous peoples in South America or even in Africa or other places that have never heard about Jesus Christ. But they have His attributes written upon their minds and their hearts. They do the right thing anyway. They will be accepted and sanctified for the level of knowledge that they have, and probably be a lot better than a lot of Christians think they are. For instance, it even says there in the New Testament about, that the sinners will be sitting down at Abraham's table in the kingdom of God sooner than the scribes and Pharisees, that kind of a thing. Okay? All right. So I wanted to kind of tie that in to show you how this whole process has been corrupted, especially in this nation right here over the last. I'm not saying we had a perfect start, but it definitely didn't stay anywhere near perfect. It's gone way down the tubes, and you know about my basically taking Russia and saying it's the Assyria of the modern day, to take out the evil chosen people that refused to follow their sanctification process and corrupted themselves. That's how God handles it. He uses other nations to punish nations, and that's where we are. Okay, So I just wanted to cover that real quick to kind of give you a background on that. And then I began this conversation with talking about Jerome and the Gutenberg Bible. So I wanted to give you a little background. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, but a lot of people really don't understand where their scriptures came from. And I could get into the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, and the oral traditions and all that came up, and how the redaction by Ezra took place. And I've talked about the book of Deuteronomy, the book of the law, being found by the high priest in Josiah's reign. I talked about all those things, like they didn't have Deuteronomy before. Is that what they're telling us? Well, at any rate, so the New Testament, the Old Testament, was written in primarily Hebrew, and in some places, like in Daniel, there were portions of it that were in Aramaic. The New Testament, there are some problems there. We don't have any of the original manuscripts, not really. I'm talking about written by the actual people that penned them. And a lot of that was pseudepigraphical, which means that, and it was very common in the early days, I mean, throughout history, someone would pretend to be an honored person and just to get the ideas on paper and noticed by the society at large, or whoever the audience was. We find that reprehensible today, but in those days, it was kind of like advertising, okay, to get your ideas out there. But that didn't mean, for instance, that the Gospel of Matthew was written by the Apostle Matthew. It doesn't mean that the book of Peter, the epistles of Peter, were written by the Apostle Peter, even though they claim that, and there's been a whole scholarly discussion on that. And that disturbs a lot of people, and it should, okay, because you need to be aware of those things. Well, so what happened was that the Hebrew Bible had been translated into Greek, on into the Septuagint. And I'm running this down real quick. So we had the Septuagint, the Old Testament, and then the different epistles and those things that were written. And I've talked about the Q document, and it had nothing to do with the Q from Trump's time. This is what they think the original document was, that the Gospels drew from, the writers of the Gospels drew from to write their Gospels. And that's why there's so many similarities and yet some significant differences. For instance, the genealogy of Jesus that you find, different in Matthew and Luke, they're different. So whoever wrote those, like I maintain that the book of Revelation would have originally been written by John in Hebrew. Okay, that I maintain that. Then it was translated into Greek, and then Latin, and that was the case with a lot of the New Testament stuff that was coming up. And I don't want to get into all the details of that, but I'm just kind of giving you a 60,000-foot view. The Old Testament Latin translations or Greek translations were then, and Hebrew translations, a little bit of both, were then moved into, by St. Jerome, into Latin. Okay? The New Testament, which was most likely what he had in the manuscripts, was all in Greek. He may have had access to some Hebrew documents, but I kind of doubt it for the reasons I've given in my historical explanations. But regardless, he translated those into Latin as well. And that work that he did became known as the Latin Vulgate. Okay, so we've gone already, and it was very, very obvious that his interpretations of those translations are evident in the Vulgate. It's very obvious, especially if you know Hebrew and Greek. I know Hebrew better than I know Greek by a long shot, but I can certainly see it in the Hebrew translations, and I've talked about those before. Well, then, of course, on top of that were the agendas of the Roman Empire, the Rabbinic Judaism from the Council of Yavna, and of course, you could even include later on the Council of Nicaea. All these people had their particular agendas that they were working on, and Philo of Egypt got it, which was earlier. He was right around 60 AD, that time period, 50 to 60 AD, when he had his influence. You had Josephus. You've heard me talk about that before. You had Roman historians that had no interest in helping Christianity along. Tacitus, Suetonius, and then Pliny, for instance, who was a governor in the Damascus area in Syria, I believe, who wrote about the Christians, not Jesus himself, although there was some indication that Pilate, with the Acti Pilati, which there's some questions on who actually wrote that too, but we'll just go with it for a minute. The point is that there were early references to Christians, but what you got to understand is, again, what Christian meant to the Roman Empire. In Hebrew, Moshiach translates into Greek as Christ. Christ is not a name, it's an office, like Mashiach, because in fact, as I've explained exhaustively in my Religion and Eisenman series, Mashiach translates into Greek as Christ. It's not a name, it's an office. So what the Romans saw was an insurrection, somebody claiming to be king. And you see that in the New Testament when Pilate asks him if he's a king, right? Asks Jesus if he's a king. He says, you said it. All right, so he committed an insurrection, and that's what he was crucified for, not for the Beatitudes on the Mount of Olives or whatever. It was because they considered him to be an insurrectionist, standing against the authority of Rome. So with the Christian persecutions under Nero, and then going forward, from Claudius to Nero, these are the emperors, on into the situation with Trajan, and then even Domitian later. All of these different things were going. We could even go to the Bar Kokhba rebellion of 130 AD, for instance. What they saw here was Jewish nationalism trying to reseat the king. That's how the Romans looked at it. So these persecutions of Christians that are talked about so much in the history, even from the early church fathers, is skewed. You're really not getting the story. They weren't persecuted because they treated their neighbor nice, or Rome was very, very accepting of other religions. They didn't even care about the Jewish religion that much, but they did care about the Messianic movement that was trying to seize power. And that's what early Christianity was, and I've talked about that ad infinitum. Well, at any rate, so you have this whole situation where the Messianic movement had to be removed, had to be taken down. And the last vestiges of it, as I just said, kind of reared its head in the Bar Kokhba. Some people would actually say, well, his name was Bar Kokhba, and that's true. But the Bar Kokhba rebellion, that means son of the star, as a matter of fact, in 130 AD. And so Rome was still dealing with this thing that they thought was an insurrection. All right. There were problems, and it's even evident in Acts, and I talked about this once before. James, the brother of Jesus, who was the bishop of Jerusalem, who was actually the person that stood into Jesus' place, not Peter, told Paul, who apparently was an historical figure of some type. We see evidence of that even in Josephus and some other things. But James says there in Acts, okay, you can go to the Gentiles, but do not preach to the synagogues. Do not go to the Jews. They have a different message that they have to hear, and that's our responsibility, not yours. And Paul agreed to that, and then he violated it later. And so he caused these disturbances. He and his followers, Barnabas and some others probably, caused these disturbances throughout the Roman Empire, where the Jews would basically get into fights with these guys that were trying to tell them that they couldn't circumcise themselves or shouldn't, and that Jesus was the Messiah, and they didn't want to hear that. So these problems started not with the Roman Empire initially, but between Jews who were and Christians who were fighting amongst each other. I use Christians because Paul changed it. As I've said, he changed the whole circumstance here, because the whole object, as I've said, Paul was an infiltrator, in my estimation, and his whole purpose was to be a Roman asset. I think we have CIA assets today. Infiltrators, informants, right? CIs, all that kind of stuff. He was in there to gather information to find the leaders of the groups and get them in trouble. James ended up getting killed for all this, as just an example. And there were others. And to change the idea of the Messianic movement, which was a military movement against Rome and against the Herodian puppets of the Roman Empire, uh, and morphed it into a paschal, passive religion that said you have to support the government, which was never the original intention. So I'm giving you this whole background because all of this starts to show its ugly head as early as the time of the fall of the Second Temple. Because at that time already, the Messianic movement, the Nazarenes, the Nazir as they were known at the time, the Nazarenes, the real Christians, the Messianists, all right, were at odds with the Hellenistic movement that Paul started. And it's interesting that Paul accused people like James of not telling the truth and of lying, and that they were preaching a different gospel than they should have, when it was just the reverse. In other words, you've heard about projection, right? The United States projects what they do onto Russia, for instance, right? Just as an example. The leader of Ukraine right now likes to project onto things. It just came out, for instance, that when he was accusing Putin, the leader of Ukraine at the present time was accusing Putin of hiding in the bunker. The fact of the matter was it was Zelensky, and that's finally come out because the former Prime Minister of Israel, Bennett, had an interview with Zelensky and knew all this, and he was hiding in the bunker. And so he's just come out and said, well, Zelensky's projecting on Putin. It was Zelensky who was hiding in the bunker, not Putin. And then Zelensky comes out like he's a Superman. Well, it was all a lie. It's all staged. He's an actor, and we should all know that these people here that are pushing this are very evil, and they have puppets here, and they're destroying Europe in the process, as I said in the beginning. So there we are. That's basically what's happened. So we have some of the early fathers, Justin Martyr, Eusebius, and those types of early church fathers influencing what was considered canon, what wasn't. For instance, the book of James was not highly thought of because it wasn't Pauline in nature. They really liked the Pauline thing because they could control people with that. It was getting away from the idea of really finding God. And I'm sorry, but that's the case. And it also went along with the methods of the Roman Empire. So these different early people then fed into what was available to Jerome. And Jerome made the translation into the Latin Vulgate. And then from there, of course, we start having even more of this early dogma that demanded certain things, spiritualized the church, spiritualized even Jesus himself, not making him what he really was and who he really was, but into what Rome wanted him to be. And all of that is explained in my Religion and Eisenman series. So now we have Jerome making the Vulgate translation, and the translation into Latin. I took Latin, by the way. I'm kind of out of practice now, but it's real evident that there are some, what I would say, some abnormalities in the translation. And I don't think that they were by accident. Just like with Strong's and Gesenius, like I told you before, they based their translations and things because of their Christian traditions rather than what they really had. And I showed that, for instance, with the letters, dividing up the word for image in the first chapter of Genesis and showing how the letters did not mean image in the way that a lot of people try to make it. It really meant the image of God on the earth is righteous rule by mankind because they were given dominion over the earth. So that was the image. But that's not how it was viewed by Gesenius or by Strong's, because they had all these other traditions and probably an agenda. And I also talked about, I had a whole video on the thing with concubines or musicians there in Daniel, where I showed that the word was actually concubines, but they translated it as musicians, you know. And I was able to prove that from the Natarchon of breaking the word down into its individual letters and what they mean. Well, these scholars don't do that. I'm not saying they don't know about it. I'm saying that, number one, it goes against the orthodox concepts which enable the powers that be to rule and keep control, and it keeps the people in the dark about the truth. Or maybe the scholars don't know about those fine little points of Hebrew, which is unlike really any other language when you get down to it. So the Vulgate is made with its interpretations in the translation and the errors that are promulgated through that. It comes to Johann Gutenberg. He prints it up, and it slowly gets put out to the world, and people start asking questions. And those who asked questions were considered enemies of the church, the Roman Catholic Church. And in retaliation, we had all types of things happen. As I mentioned earlier, the persecutions, the Inquisition, just a lot of bad stuff. People, maimed and murdered because they were considered heretics because they'd read something and say, well, that's not what we were told in church, and that interpretation even there doesn't make sense. There must be something else going on. As I've said in a couple of videos now, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense, and you need to follow your gut and to try to find out the truth, because there's always somebody out there trying to deceive you. I even tell you to check me, and that's why I give you all this background information. I'm not right 100% of the time, but my intent, as I said earlier in this video, isn't even truth, because I'm not capable of that except in some absolutes, like the male-female relationship, which I mentioned as being a truth. But truth is it's hard for us to ascertain. So what we need to do is be able to ask the questions. And if you're not able to ask the questions, then you're never going to get to the truth. Okay. So the Bibles were chained, and even earlier, some of the earlier Latin copies prior to the Gutenberg were chained to the podium, and to the pulpit. And as I just said, ostensibly by the apologists, it was because they didn't want the Scripture stolen, which I'm sure was true to some extent. But the other reason was they didn't want people to read it. So the Gutenberg Bible comes out. Finally, it starts to get some traction, especially when Luther translates it into German, and the Protestant Reformation is born out of that. It wasn't because somebody like Luther wanted power. It's because they saw that there were problems in the interpretations and the dogmas that were being promulgated by the powerful institution of the day. And the Roman Catholic Church was nothing more than a manifestation of the Roman Empire. And if you understand history, you'll see that. And so it had agendas that it wanted to push. And I know Roman Catholics don't want to hear that, but that's the history, okay? And the Protestants have a problem because even though they were trying to correct, but they saw some of the corruptions of the church and their interpretations of Scripture, the indulgences, for instance, and even the Inquisition, those kinds of things, they were still fruit from the same tree. And so a lot of the error still went forward even after that. So you need to be on your toes, and that's why I get into the nitty-gritty of these things. Okay. So from that point on, it became difficult for the powers that be to control things. So they decided that, well, okay, we have all this division going on now. We might as well take advantage of that and work on dividing people along those lines even more. And hence, you see why I said that the Gutenberg situation and our modern day divide and conquer is all basically the same, just in slightly different venues, is really what it is. Okay. I think that's really where I wanted to go. I have some notes here from the other day. I'm going to see what happens in the chat here. If you want to go to some of these other issues, I don't know if you want to. Basically on this marriage situation again, which I really harp on that because that's where the war is. That's what they're trying to destroy mankind by all kinds of methods, poisoning, blocking the sun so that we can control the climate. but then they say they want to use solar energy. Well, if you're going to use solar energy, why would you want to block the sun? See, they don't make any sense. They're just throwing all these things at you to keep you off balance. Whether China is an enemy or an ally of the powers that be in the United States, and I maintain that China is more of an ally than an enemy, but they've got to keep this thing going, and that's why I suspect this balloon might have some other parts to it. I'm not saying that it wasn't what it was, that they weren't gathering information, but they certainly let it go for a long time, didn't they? And then, of course, pointing to Russia, even though it's made some huge advances and really is probably the most righteous country in the world today, is my estimation. At least in the northern hemisphere, it seems to be that way. If you would like, I can go into some of this other information. What I've said so far, just keep in mind, the Gutenberg press used the Latin Vulgate, printed it. It was from Jerome. Jerome had access to some earlier manuscripts, as I said, the Septuagint, Greek, and possibly some Hebrew translations of New Testament material, which was already corrupted by that point. We're talking about 300 AD at that point, and those changes and those errors were moved on down the line, not only in principle, in concept, but the translations also caused some problems. So you really have to dig into it, as I often do, to find out what the truth is. Okay, let me put this on here. I know that's going to raise a lot of ire of a lot of people, but I think if you see, don't you like my blue blockers? If you think about how what the Roman Empire, Talmudic Judaism, and the early church founders, and I'm not talking about the apostles and Jesus and those people, I'm talking about the people that really changed it into this Hellenized view, the Messianic movement, the Nazarene movement, into a Hellenized idea, starting pretty close to the end of the first century, but it really got going by the second and third centuries. And then we've been stymied and had a lot of difficulty since then trying to discover what really the issues are. And how I tied all of that to what's happening in the world today, how those same methods have been used against us today in the political sphere, even attacking what we consider to be liberty, social constructs of, you don't have a right to speak your mind. You don't have a right to say that there's a problem with this little country over here in the Middle East, at the end of the Mediterranean over here. Just things like that even states and governors push, because they either don't understand or they're part of the problem. And I include DeSantis and Abbott in that same category. Okay. Red Scout, what is going on? I thought he trusted God. I do trust God. The problem is that you put your whole faith in something that a lot of people have had their hands on and used for their own purposes. That doesn't mean that God can't use the scriptures to get you a message that you need to have. I'm not saying that can't happen, but I'm saying that a lot of things are not as they appear. And I won't budge on that. And this marriage issue that I'm such a stickler on, the man and woman relationship, and that Jesus was married is one of them. Okay? Yeah, our problem is the U.S. I agree with that. Oklahoma federal judge ended no guns if you smoke marijuana. Yeah, you can have all the prescription drugs you want. I know. It's really bad. Pure of heart and mind, Joseph and Donna. Yeah, pure in heart and mind is really what it's about. And again, I'm going to go back to the two great commandments. It doesn't tell you that you have to believe Peter, James, John. It doesn't tell you that you have to believe Ezekiel. It doesn't tell you that you have to believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It doesn't tell you anything like that. It says, Jesus said it, there are two important commandments. And upon these two will determine whether your life, the way you choose to bear your fruit, is going to be sanctified by God. One, that you love God, respect Him, revere Him, which is really what fear means: awe, respect, revere. You may not understand God. He doesn't expect that. He just wants you to have awe, respect, and honor for him. And two, you love your neighbor, your fellow man as yourself. That's where you're going to be judged, not on all these doctrines and dogmas. Not even on the marriage thing, okay? I'm not even including that. I'm just saying that that's one of the things that's been so corrupted is our understanding of that. And that's why, as I've often said, Christians are responsible for the dysphoria today in the realm of sex, gender, and that kind of thing. It's because of this whole thing with what they tried to portray as Jesus being the example of, purity by not having associations with women that he was contracted with. Okay, well, like I said, I know that upsets people, but I'm going to say it. As a matter of fact, there's a scripture in Isaiah that says, and you might remember this. It's in Isaiah 53, I think. It talks about, he was wounded for our transgressions and this and that, and he was despised and rejected of man, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And then it says, and when he makes a sacrifice for sin, he will see his seed. Whoa. He has children. He will see his seed. They'll be standing before him. One of those people standing before him was one of his children. At least one of them. And then it says, and who shall declare his generation? For he is cut off from the land of the living. Well, Michael Heiser and others will take that word generation in the Greek and they'll say, well, yeah, it means, that age, that group of people. But it also means, yeah, it does have those two commandments, Jesse, that's right. It also means his posterity, who will declare who he is, what he did, and who his family, his progeny, his royal line is. I'll tell you who's going to declare it and who has been for at least the last 30 years. I could tell you more about that, but I'll just leave it at that. Okay. I mentioned in some Twitter communications over the last few days, there were some questions about the veracity of certain scriptures and who wrote them, and some of these things were going on. And I almost totally reject the Pauline epistles. Okay, I only accept them insofar as they follow Torah and they follow the Epistle of James and to some extent the Epistle of Jude. All of the Pauline epistles I'm very suspect of, and unless he's plagiarized James and Jude or the Torah, I'm very careful about what Paul says because I know what he was actually about. It's obvious. Okay, nice sayings, but it was designed to destroy the Messianic movement, what he was up to. And that argument between James and Paul is evident of that in Acts. Okay, and in the historical record you can find evidence, especially in Josephus, where Paul had a lot to do with the death of James. Maybe not directly, but in the way that he basically set James up. But at any rate, let's see if I can figure out how to go where I need to go from here. All the Pauline epistles, as I just said, I'm very suspect of, unless they agree with James, Jude, and the Torah. I'm very careful. Hebrews, supposedly the epistle of Paul to the Hebrews, and he takes somebody, either Paul himself or somebody writing in his name, takes credit for it in, let's see where this is here. I think I wrote it down. Anyway, in Hebrews, towards the end, I think it's in like the 10th chapter of Hebrews or somewhere in there, you find out it's Paul because he says he's been in bondage and that kind of all the things that Paul talks about. But I think the original epistle to the Hebrews was most likely because of the prohibition that James put onto Paul not to deal with the Jews or in the synagogues. He was only to go to the Gentiles. I think that the original of that was probably written by James himself, or possibly his brother Jude, or maybe even the real Peter. Okay. Turkey is getting slammed, 7.8 quake. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Oh, crazy things going on. So, Hebrews, I'll take quite a bit from Hebrews, but I'm very careful when it starts to approach Pauline doctrine. First and Second Peter, I'm careful with those. There's some good things, as I mentioned in this Twitter account that I was talking with, that First and Second Peter have some good things, but even there, some Pauline issues poke their head up. And when I see those, I question the information that surrounds that area right there. Let me give you a couple things here that might be of interest to you. The other day I mentioned the chapter and verses in Psalms that have to do with the Messiah being married and his train and those types of things. Train meaning his followers, right? His family, really, is what it's talking about. And that was in Psalms 45, primarily verses 6 and 7, but also 9. That Psalms scripture is also repeated in Hebrews 1 and 8. Paul didn't do that. That's definitely from James. That's just an example of one of the ones I'm talking about. Okay, let's see if there's some other things here that might be important to you. I've often said that it's kind of strange that if the virgin birth was as the Christians say it was, that Mary had no sex, that would definitely be a miracle. and also the resurrection. You would think that those would be main topics in all of the epistles, etc., that were written by all those people. And the virgin birth is not mentioned anywhere from Acts all the way through to Revelation. No mention of the virgin birth. And yet, you would think that being so important, if it was really what the Christians say it is, it would be there. But of course, as I pointed out, it just means that the sign would be he'd be a firstborn son. Okay, that's what it meant, that he would be born a virgin. He would be a firstborn son, not that his mother didn't have sex. That's number one. Number two would be the resurrection. Despite how important that is, other than the Gospels, you only see it in a few places. James doesn't mention it at all. Let me give you a couple of those. In 1 Peter, it's mentioned. In 1 Peter 1:3 and in 3:21, it is. But it has a Pauline taste sense to it. 1 Peter 3:7 is another thing about how, well, that's not about the resurrection. Hold on. That's a whole other thing altogether. There are some others. Let's see if I got them down here. Hebrews 13:20 talks about the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, but it's not as extant as you would think of. You'd think that, Paul would be talking about it all the time. You'd think that Jude and James would have said something, and they don't. So what is going on there? And I've explained before the reason why I don't think that that's as evident in James and Jude and some of these others is because they're more concerned about the conversion of your heart and mind rather than the resurrection. It's not really a central part of their teachings. Not that it doesn't matter, because it does, but it certainly isn't evident in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I've maintained many of them were written in this period, maybe even by James himself and by Jesus himself. And I've done that into the religion and Eisenman series as well. The importance of marriage. This is kind of interesting, and this kind of comes from probably Jesus himself and probably James too. But in 1 Peter 3:7, this is again talking about marriage and all that. It talks about wives and husbands are heirs together. There's this big argument about whether, there's marriage in heaven, however you look at that. And I've talked about that before. I maintain that there is, because the physical and the spiritual are supposed to be united, right? Well, in 1 Peter 3:7, go take a look at it, because this goes along with my argument that Jesus was married, Psalms 45, 6 to 7 and 9. And there are others I could give you, but this is 1 Peter 3:7, where it says, wives and husbands are heirs together. For this cause shall a man leave his mother and his father, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And Jesus talked about that's how it was in the beginning. And that's how it'll be back when we return to Eden. Life after death. A lot of people complain that, oh, when you're dead, you're dead. It says so in Ecclesiastes, and the beings, the entities that Jesus went to preach to in prison were the fallen angels, and not people that have died. Well, I've told you about the Samuel thing, right? Being brought up by the witch of Endor. People say, well, that was a demon. Well, hardly. A demon's not going to tell Saul what he told him. But here's something for you to look at for those of you who wonder about this, okay? 1 Peter 3:19 to 20. They're not fallen angels. And 1 Peter 4 and 6. That's in your New Testament. Just something for you to consider. Okay. I could talk about Jesus living like a man with all the rights, responsibilities, all of that. That's basically in Hebrews 2:17, that he was made like unto his brethren. And I might also mention, let's see, I think I'll leave that one alone for now. One of the big issues, I guess, is, and I've talked about this before, getting back on the Jesus relationship with his consort, which is mentioned in the Gnostic Gospels quite a bit, but I know that's about 200 years removed. But there's evidence, like I said, in the Old Testament that the Messiah would need to be married. I've talked about Psalms 45:9. There's Isaiah 6:1. There's Isaiah 53:10. I'm just throwing these out there. I was going to write them up and give a whole thing on it, but I'm going to let you guys look at this. Of course, Genesis 1 and 2, where it's a commandment. The male and female thing, they're made that way. And that in Psalms 45, it talks about, well, David is saying, God, thy God, and talking about the queen and who's adorned in gold of Ophir, or gold from Ophir. Ophir is a place to the east of Palestine that apparently had very, very pure gold deposits. And so what it's saying is that God so loves this wife of his, be it the Yahweh in heaven or his mirror image, Yahweh on earth, who you would say is Jesus, and that's okay, we'll go with that now, that his wife is, first of all, basically hidden from view, but also that he adorns her in the very finest gold. Like I said, the story of Adam and Eve is the greatest love story ever told. I've said that many, many times. In John 2:1 to 10, it's interesting there, this subject came up about the wedding feast at Cana. And there are scholars that say, yeah, it's Jesus' marriage. Others say, no, it was a cousin or a brother or a sister or whatever. That's probably open a little bit. But in John 2:1 to 10, something happens here. Mary is in charge. Mary, Jesus' mother, is in charge. Well, under Jewish custom, Israelite custom, the mother of the bridegroom is in charge of the wedding. And I've talked about this before. And before the bridegroom enters into the marriage chamber, well, I should say after the bride and the bridegroom go into the marriage chamber, the mother, the person that's in charge of the wedding goes into the bridal chamber to make sure that the hymen was broken, and that's a token of the woman's virginity. Mary's officiating at this wedding as the mother of the bridegroom. So whether it was one of Jesus' brothers or Jesus himself, that's what's happening there. And I maintain that that is evidence of Jesus' own wedding was the marriage of Cana, because of the cultural norms that are basically shown in John 2, 1 to 10. I'll probably stop there. I think I've covered most everything that I wanted to. We could get into a lot more detail, but I think all of this shows what I was trying to say at the beginning, that that while this is a wonderful guide, there have been errors in understanding that have been promulgated through the ages because of certain powers that be, their agendas, and also the difficulties in the translations from one language to another. And I hope that my showing you some of this will at least, like I say, you don't have to necessarily take it as, the absolute truth. I wouldn't expect that. But at least understand that things are probably not the way you've been told, and that if you start calling people like myself a heretic in the old days, that means that you're going to kill me. Okay? That's what it means. And people don't deserve that for looking for the truth. In my book, might as well get this out and read it. By the way, I still haven't heard that the reprinting of my book is done. But in my autobiography, I quote in the introduction my understanding of this and how I think it works. Let's see if I can find it. I'm going to have to take a moment here and look for it. It might take me a minute. Okay. I don't know why I always have a hard time finding this when I tell people about it, but I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from here. And this helps you to understand that. Oh, wrong book. I just remembered where it is. See, even I get things as I read so much. It's actually in this one, the introduction to this one. And it says this, which still goes along with all of my understanding of things. Yeah, this is in the introduction. It doesn't really have a page, but I'll just read it to you because it's in the introduction. As I said, and I could read the whole paragraph here, but I'm just going to read a couple of sentences. A most important aspect of that character, maybe I'll back up and read this. If the self-appointed Apostle Paul said anything of value, it was that we are to be joint heirs with Christ. What did I just read you out of Hebrews? That the man and the wife are heirs together as they go forward. Joint heirs with Christ, man and woman together, husband and wife. Meaning we cannot make the Creator anthropomorphic, but it seems obvious that the Creator has provided us a path to achieve a higher level of understanding, to take some of the Creator's attributes to ourselves. Taking upon you the name of God is exhibiting his attributes, being his image on the earth. A most important aspect of that character is to look for the truth. As one author put it, to put dogma above truth is no way to honor God. That's my absolute philosophy. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, you're right. Most people don't believe. Oh, darling Peniel, how you doing? Yeah. Most people do deny the sun shining at noonday. That's correct because you get in entrenched in your rut, in things that you set that you then don't want those disturbed, so you're not willing to actually search these out. And that's not a lack of faith. It actually is a matter of faith to question things. Even God said, "Let us reason together as one man reasons with another." Yeah, Russian leadership definitely knows what's going on here. Arizona infidel, how you doing? Yeah, that's absolutely true. They know how weak we are, and that's all been planned out. And China's taking advantage of it too. And you can't blame them. We've been raping the world as an empire for at least 70 years, probably longer, and we haven't repented of our evil. So God's going to use others to punish us, and that's just the way it is. And I don't want to see it, but it's the way it is. Faith without works is dead. That's right, darling Peniel. That's right. Let's see. Red Scout. Russia seems Christian to me, so I'm in there. Yeah, they are. Red Scout. Russia is Orthodox Christianity. Very very religious. They're actually very good people. Of course, they have thugs there, but these people pointing a finger at the thugs they have in Russia. That's the kettle calling the pot black, or the pot calling the kettle black. However that goes, right? I mean, the projection from these people to demonize Russians is just unforgivable, unforgivable. And damn John Bolton and his ilk, and Victoria Nuland, and the Institute for the Study of War. All those people, they're demonic neocon prick bastard bitches. Okay, all right. And again, I apologize for going so far around all of that, but you know how I like to cover a lot of territory and bring it in so that you can go back and just kind of think through a lot of that and see how it fits, because that's really what I'm about. I'm about revealing what has been suppressed and repressed over the years, not giving you the absolute truth. Except again, as I said, the man-woman relationship, I will not budge on that. But on a lot of these other situations that we find, uncovering those things, including the marriage relationship and men and women and all that. Certainly, a lot of that has been suppressed or made to be dirty or nasty or whatever, and I reject all of that. Okay. Uh, yeah, our government's gone bad. That's right, Bonnie in the Spirit. That's actually true. Roy addressing that up. Roy addressing that up. I'm not sure I know what that means. All right. Christopher did a piece today on the Jerusalem Post article regarding. Yeah. Thank you, Commander McBragg. That's true. That's what I was referring to earlier. I'll just read this. Commander McBragg says, Alex Christoforou, he has his own YouTube channel. He's part of the Duran with Alexander Makuris. Christopher did a piece today on the Jerusalem Post article regarding Bennett, that's the old Prime Minister of Israel, going to Russia last March and getting Putin to promise he wouldn't assassinate Zelensky. So who's running the war? Well, there'll be people like Bennett going in there and trying to fix things. I believe that they're trying to empty out Ukraine of white Christians for probably a lot of people that live in this section of the country or world. That's probably true, but the important part of that, the reason why I brought it up, is because Zelensky projected onto Putin that he was hiding in the bunkers when it was Zelensky himself who was doing that, and he only came out when he got the word from Bennett that Putin wasn't going to assassinate him. I thought that was interesting. Oh, very good, Mary. Ira being Paul. Paul was called the spouting liar in the ancient text, and you say scrolls. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's right. His loyalty was to Rome. Have you listened to the Golden Thread? Let's see. You're talking to at Ira Beam, so I'll let you all have that discussion. But I talk about it in my Eisenman series. Robert Eisenman, one of the foremost authorities on the Dead Sea Scrolls, in my own book, The Crimson Thread, which I just read from a little excerpt from my book. Um, all right. Okay. Does anybody want to? You know, I know I beat that marriage and man woman thing to death, but I am just I see where we're going. Like I just mentioned earlier in the video, Jackson Hinkle was attacked for his stand against this gender dysphoria that's promulgated. It's one thing to have issues about what you are. We all go through a maturation process trying to figure out who we are, but to promulgate this stuff is evil, and that's really where the problem is. And so when it shows up in situations like Jackson Hinkle is, they're trying to censor him from talking at the situation that's happening. I think it's February 20th, 19th, somewhere in there, um, raging against the war at D.C. In D.C., he's one of the speakers. These people, because of his stand on the corruption of marriage and what it means by social institutions, movements, and things like that are part of the design to destroy humanity. When he stood up against that, they used that to try to censor him so he couldn't speak at this. And so that's why I say this is an issue. This is a problem, and that's one reason why these people here are going to destroy this. And you need to pray, and stay out of the way, because this is something. I mean, God took out Sodom and Gomorrah for this, if you believe the scriptures, and I don't even need the scriptures to tell me there's a problem with it. I can see it in history. When societies have gone down that road, destruction isn't far behind. It just isn't. Yeah, Paul was paid, Lynn BB. That's right. He was a Roman Herodian asset. That's exactly right. Yeah, Zelensky's a tool. Yeah, for sure. Mountain Truth 1, indeed. You have to stand. The man-woman relationship represents God's natural order. Sustainable stewards. Absolutely right. That's why I say the Messiah, whether you believe it's Jesus or somebody else, the Messiah must be married. He can't be celibate. He can't be a monk that doesn't have a wife. It's not in the image of God, so he can't be that. And Psalms 45:9 proves it as just one, and that's the reason why I read that today, and a couple of others back a little while ago. AZ Infidel Roy, you should start a Discord server. I had one at one time. It got loaded down with Q people. I don't want to go there again. Discord is loaded with those types of people. I know there's some good things, but I figure when YouTube takes me out, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Gab. When YouTube takes me out, yeah, I might lose everything, but I'll figure that my calling is then done and over with at that time, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. I've said my piece. I'm surprised. I thought I was done before, and then, as I've told you, a lot of times I'll be laying in bed trying to go to sleep, and there's, no, you got to get up and talk about this. And I don't want to get up. No, I don't want to get up. Okay. That happens to me quite a bit. But anyway, all right. And I was also going to mention, some people feel slighted, and I've said this before. I stopped going to my DMs on Twitter some time ago, especially the message requests. I feel bad that I've had to shut that down and not take part in it. As I've explained, there are only a couple of people that I DM now. The journalist from France is one that he calls me his colleague. That's Guy Bouillon. I go for him, and I go for 2 or 3 other people to message me outside of the public's view. I do not go and look at my message requests or my DMs. So all of you who are kind enough to try to give me information or get a hold of me on there, there are some that I do that with, but I have had too many bad experiences with agreeing to meet with people. They'll say, I'm going to be here in this place. Are you going to be close by, whether it's in Wyoming or Utah or California? Sometimes I've done actually I've done broadcasts from a lot of places, and I'll get people say, oh, are you there? I want to come and meet you. I have never had a good experience from that, ever. I'm not saying that everybody that wants that would be a problem, but in almost every instance where I have agreed to do that for whatever reason, it's been a bad experience. So I have some people right now that are asking if they come where I am, if we can meet up and talk. No. Okay, I don't mean to be mean. I don't mean to be nasty. It's just that my experience in that has been miserable. So I just as soon not go there. If I see that, for instance, there are people that I would love to meet, that I'd like to go and have contact with, but I'm not going to do that in an artificial way over Twitter or even YouTube. I'm not going to say I want to meet you. I'm not going to say let's get together and talk about something. I'm just not going to do that. So I'm just not going to respond to people that want to have these meetings. If they're in what if I'm in an area and they're there again, I'm not. It's not that I'm accusing anybody of anything. It's just that it's just too much. It's just been a very unfortunate experience 99% of the time. Plus, I get honeypots after me, if you know what those are, and I avoid those like the plague. Okay, let's drink some 3-2 brewskis. Ira Beam, who has 3-2 anymore? Everybody's supposed to be at 5% now. I guess there's one state left. Um, I think everything's 5% now, but I stay away from beer now. I like it, different types, especially Scottish ales and German. But man, the yeast in it just bloats me up too much. So I've had to leave beer. I very rarely drink any, if ever. So I go and I usually drink Scotch or whiskey. Sometimes I'll get like they have a drink called a press, for instance. It's sort of like White Claw, where it's seltzer water or carbonated water with some type of a spirit in it, about 4%. But at least that doesn't give me the bloating and the stomach issues that beer does. So I've had to leave beer alone. Really sad, actually, but that's just the way it is. Sustainable stewards. You need to protect yourself. Lots of YouTube weirdos. Well, again, I don't want to accuse anybody of that, but it just hasn't been successful, and I feel bad about it. My doctor, he watches a lot of my stuff on here, and he says, Roy, you got all these women on there. A lot of them really like you. You ought to make arrangements to meet them. I'll be honest with you, okay? I've done that about 3 times, maybe 4. Let's see. Let me think. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Guys, yeah, and that has been even worse. So I don't want to insult anybody, but I just don't feel like putting myself into that situation. I just don't. Not that I'm afraid. It's time consuming and it's emotionally difficult because then I have to tell him. I had one guy that I agreed to meet, and I had to tell him if he ever contacted my family or me again, I'd throw him in jail. Okay? I just don't want to deal with it. I say everything. Roy wants Carol back. Oh, Donald, yes, of course. But Carol also told me that I shouldn't be alone, that she wanted me to have another woman, even when she wasn't here. She actually told me that. And no, I don't think anybody could ever be like her. And I don't expect that. Um, and I'm willing to open myself up to that. As a matter of fact, I date, not frequently, but I date. And I have a set of parameters. Plus, I'm not the best looking guy in the world, and I'm certainly not the richest by any stretch of the imagination. My the things that I guess would be attractive with me is my experiences. I have experiences that most people never had and never will have. Education experience. As a matter of fact, on my card, I list my education, and I list that I'm a former Army officer and lieutenant colonel, and I've done music and written books and all that kind of stuff. And at the bottom of it, I say um, sometimes didactic, often loquacious. This proves it right. What we're doing here, I definitely could talk a lot because I have so much to draw from. And then so it goes sometimes didactic, which means I like to teach. Oftentimes loquacious, that means I'll talk a lot. And then always interesting, and that's true. And then on the back of the card, I won't tell you what my doctor had me put on a couple of them. That's definitely X-rated stuff. That's just for jokes after I get to know somebody fairly well. But on the back of my card, it says, "Experience has no equal," and it's true. So I might not have the best looks or be a gazillionaire, but my experience has no equal. I've never met anybody that's done the stuff I've done. I thought you were married, Roy? No, not at the moment. No. My wife died in 2008. That was Carol. I've often shown you pictures of her. Uh, let me get this one down. Give me a minute here. I don't want to knock this over, so let me move this out of the way. I've shown you pictures before, but here's one I haven't shown you. So let me get this down and I'll show it to you. I love talking about Carol. I mean, the loyalty and the intelligence, the love, the true spirituality of this woman. I mean, it's really amazing. This is her here. I took that picture of her. I was deployed in 2001 after 9/11, and I took 10 days leave. Met her in Venice, Italy. And we spent 10 days together. This picture was taken at the Roman Colosseum Arena, not the Colosseum in Rome, but the Roman Arena in Verona, Italy, which is where the story of Romeo and Juliet was placed. So that's Carol. All right. And, she told me, she says, Roy, you're, I can't tell you everything she said. Basically, she said, I want you need to have a woman in your life. So I've dated, let's see, somebody asked me a question here specifically on that, and I was trying to answer that. Let me see if I can find it again. Yeah, I forget what had me bring this up. Anyway, so she told me to date, and so I had about 2 years after she died, I met a lady who was absolutely gorgeous. Was a nice, was a nice combination of Marilyn Monroe, the way she looked, and Barbara Eden of I Dream of Jeannie, if you can kind of see somebody kind of like both of those. And I tried to make that work for about 2 years, but there were things there that just it couldn't be done, and I don't want to get into the details of that. But since then, that ended in 2012, almost 2013, and I haven't been serious with anybody since then. Like I said, I've gone out on dates. I go to my favorite little place and talk to people, but I'm not expecting anybody to be perfect or to be a reincarnation of Carol. But I have my standards. Certainly, I don't want anybody that's had the OWS if I can avoid it. Of course, at my age and theirs at that point, the chances of having kids is probably not going to happen. I mean, I'm still potent like I was. I mean, I'm like I was when I was 25, and no woman, anywhere near my age is going to be able to do that. So it's probably safe in that regard. But And I'm not really too worried about having protein um, shedding onto me because I'm pretty much immune to all that now anyway. But still, the mindset of people that had that done is something I have to consider. I don't care about, Carol was a Democrat, but she was a sensible, liberal, constitutional Democrat, if anybody can understand what that means. Uh, so we'd have some disagreements, never any knockdown, drag out fights. We respected each other's opinion and we loved each other enough to know that, we're going to have those differences. And that was actually a good thing because having somebody you can bounce what you think are good ideas off of and they can give you an intelligent response and rebuttal if necessary, man, that was neat. I had never ever had that. She was the first, and most of you who know my background would know she was my fourth, right? So nobody that I had ever been with before or since was like that. So whatever. Okay, let's see. Kurt, Billy, Roy, I miss Nightcap. Me too. And I would like to do those. They were kind of more of entertainment. We'd get into UFOs and ghosts and that kind of thing. It was kind of fun talking to like bartenders about what their jobs are like, or those types of things. It was a lot of fun, but my internet service just became unmanageable, unpredictable. And that's why I don't do live streams on my OBS, my live streaming software on my computer, because my internet connection is just, I can't depend on it. So I use the phone connection with my phone service, and it's upsetting. But maybe one of these days I'll start those again. I have some ideas. Lately, I've been playing with the idea, considering the idea that I'd like to start those nightcaps, but not on this channel. I'd start a whole new channel and call it Nightcap. Somebody will probably steal the idea, but I've already got it. So anyway, we'll see. Maybe in the future I can get to that and have some interesting things that we can play around with. Now I know why Loquacia is named Loquacia. Oh, you know a lady named Loquacia? That's pretty good. Okay, let's see. So anyway, low budget said, I thought you were married. No, she died, and I had one serious relationship since she died. That lasted for, like I was saying, about almost 3 years, a little over 2 years. I had to cut it off. Broke my heart, but it was absolutely necessary. And no, I'm not married. And again, I don't consider marriage going down to the state and the county building or whatever and getting a marriage license. That's not marriage to me. That's a form of prostitution. That's getting a third party involved that can control your relationship. I don't get marriage licenses from the state. That's an insult to God and to mankind, and I refuse to do it. Licensed marriage didn't show up until the 1890s, and it came about because of the government trying to control and people generally trying to control miscegenation. In other words, interracial marriage. So if you were planning on marrying interracially, they required you to get a state license. Well, then the governments found out how lucrative that could be and how much control it gives them. So then the states started to demand licenses for marriages. So they took a right of a man and a woman having their own association together, because you're supposed to have free association under the Constitution, right? Freely associate, yeah. Especially in that, determining who the mother of your children is going to be, or the father, or whatever, or just the relationship. So they wanted to license that, a right they wanted to license, and I rejected. I married my first wife when we were 18. No, I didn't have to. It wasn't because she was pregnant. Matter of fact, I can show you a picture of her. I think I can do that now too. I'm not going to show you. I told you once I was going to maybe show you pictures of my all the women that are part of my life's history, and maybe some of the women I've dated. But then a lot of people said, "Nah, that's not a good idea." Anyway, this is my first wife, Denise, and that's her right there, and that's me. This picture was taken when I was on the Murray Police Department. We got married when we were 18, both of us 18. Not because she was pregnant or we had to. It was a choice that we made. That was I did marry her legally. During the persecutions against our family, she under the under the pressures from the LDS Church and members of her family, she did leave. Um, Poor thing. I could give you more information about that, but anyway, she gave me 4 great kids who are my best friends today. Amongst my kids, they're all good friends. I have a couple of problem children, but most of them are really good. I had 11 kids, and 2 of them were kind of a problem, but most of them are great, of course. And one died in a recreational accident at a church function. She drowned. It was an accidental drowning, so they say. I suspect that there was something else going on, but we lost her. She was 15 at the time. So that was with my second marriage. I had 3 kids by her, and then Mary. I've shown you pictures of her. She was my 4th wife, and then Carol was my 3rd wife. Mary was my 3rd wife, and then Carol was my 4th. And yeah, a lot of us were together at the same time, as most of you know, but not now. I'm on the hunt. I talk at some of these places that I go. I say I'm out deer hunting, and people say, "Huh?" I say DEAR, not DEER, DEER. And they go, "Oh," so no, not married at the moment. No, and if I do get married, it's not going to be with a state license. Nope, nope, ain't going to happen. So all you women who are rich and have tons of money and all that, if you're interested in me, you're not going to have to worry about me demanding alimony. Ain't going to happen. Okay. All right. Let's see where we are here. Yeah, Meg Johnson, you're right. And I could tell some really funny anecdotes, some really serious stuff that comes with that lifestyle. By the way, all the women chose me. Okay, I wasn't out there, trying to grab them in. They came looking for me. Um, and the only reason why they left was, if they did leave, it was either because of the persecution that the family was going under. It was just too much. Other family influences, and in Carol's case, of course, she died. And then one of the lady I had an experience with 2 years after my wife died, I had to shut that one down myself. It was an issue of, Jesus says you can't divorce a wife save for the cause of fornication, but fornication doesn't just mean sexual activity. Okay, there are other issues there, and I've talked about those before, but that was the issue there. So I had to let that one go. Oh, thank you. Useless Knowledge. You said tonight there was over 350 live chat during the lesson, and everyone was cordial. Thank goodness. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you for saying Carol was beautiful. She still is. Oh, I got to tell you one other thing. Oh, today, exclamation mark, he says, your doctor needs to check out everyone and filter out the nut jobs. He thought he could do that, and he wasn't very good at it. I'll just tell you that, okay? I got to tell you about there were some really special things that happened after Carol died. I talked about them. I talked about her coming to see me, and it was her. It wasn't a demon or a fallen angel or an imposter. It was her. And then when she came, that was in central Utah at a friend's house. Then there was a situation at my home where she came, and I was saying to her, "Hey, I can't quite get it. Go talk to my daughter Elizabeth." Elizabeth was, I think, 10 or 11 at the time, and she was in the bedroom next to mine, and I heard Elizabeth start talking, and I went in there, and I didn't disturb her, but I stood at the door, and Elizabeth, she was just a little kid, like I said, 10, 11. She stops, and she turns over to me, and she says, "Daddy, Carol's here, and she wants me to tell you she loves you." And she goes back to talking, and the next morning I was dumbfounded. Wow, this is another witness of this. And I gave you some scriptures tonight about Jesus preaching to the spirits that have departed, okay? The people that live in this place, but out of our natural sight. And so the next morning I'm fixing breakfast, and I didn't say anything to her. And she comes out and she says, I say to her, I said, "Well, how did you sleep?" And that's all I said. She goes, Oh, I slept pretty good. She's rubbing her eyes. She's in a little pink robe. Rubbing her. She goes, oh, Daddy, I talked to Carol last night. And I thought, well, there it is, right? And then there was another thing that I don't talk about too much, and I might tell you about. This is for people that have lost loved ones, okay? Just so you know. I was out camping. I was on like a 2-week camping trip. It was during the summer. I think it was July. It's been about 8 years ago, I guess, something like that. And I was up in the mountains, and I got up in the morning, fixed my breakfast, and I was sitting there next to the stove. I have a camp stove, and I was sitting there, and this hummingbird. Has anybody here watched the series 1883? I have not seen it, but I saw one of the clips where this happens to oh, what's his name? Sam Elliott. Happens to Sam Elliott. His wife in the movie had died, and so he's really feeling bad. He's missing her. It's really weighing on him. And this exactly same thing, even more, happened to me. So I'm sitting there in my chair, and this little hummingbird comes up, and Carol's two favorite birds were hummingbirds and bluebirds. And this little hummingbird comes up and starts hovering just inches from my face, and then comes delicately down and touches its beak. It was a female, touches her beak right on my cheek, like kissing me. Came back out, hovered for a minute, and then left. Yep, that happened. And it happens in the movie 1883 with Sam Elliott at the end. Except he apparently shoots himself, and I didn't do that. So, just so you know. Yeah, on 427, I'll say you're saying I shouldn't meet anyone off the internet. By the way, I don't use dating apps. Too many honeypots come after me there. I get trapped. Well, I don't get trapped, but I end up finding out that it's not for real. They're just trying to get information, or just like you say, difficult people. I could give you stories, but I won't because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But yeah, I tried it. Like the internet, I tried once, a dating site, and then there was one other time that my doctor wanted me to do it, and the IC had me thrown off. It's banned me from it, so they don't want me to find somebody. And I think I talked about that on a video not long ago. And then there was, the couple of times I've met people from YouTube or Twitter, and that's not been a good thing either. So, no, I learned my lesson. That's why I say even guys now I want to meet because we might have some similar ideas on doctrinal issues or scriptural issues or history or whatever. Unless it's a group meeting, it's just not a good idea. And so the individuals that have asked me to do this, you know who you are. It's not going to happen, okay? Just so you know. In a group setting, I would do that. Not an individual, no thanks. I just can't risk it. Yeah, absolutely gorgeous, Ira Beam. Oh, and the thing about Carol was inside and out. She just didn't look good. She was good, inside and out. Unbelievable person. How about a live speech? Mig Johnson. Well, sure, that'd work, but who would want me to speak to a live audience? It's like Jackson Hinkle, he got attacked by these people. Um, we'd have to have security. We'd have to have people who would keep crazies away, and people who would find out what I'm very well known in the Intermountain West. I mean, they kind of forget about me if I'm not around much, but as soon as I show up somewhere, people know who I am from my past, and it doesn't take long before the walls come up or nasty comments are made. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example, but I won't. Okay, they're telling me I gotta leave. Did you see that? I better leave. I'm sorry. When that happens, I know that I'm going to get cut off completely, and I don't want this to have a problem going up. But I'll tell you this story. So I was at a funeral, and everybody knew who I was, and we went out to where the the, the burial was going to take place, at the burial site. and I'm standing there, and this person didn't notice that I was there. They all knew who I was, but I had sunglasses on, and I was kind of standing off the side. But this person walked by and said, "Yeah, that damn Roy Potter, that polygamist, he was here," and I was standing right there. Of course, I'm not a polygamist anymore, but and one of the people that knew I was there and was a dear friend of mine said, "Hey, he's standing right next to you. You better apologize." So see, that's the kind of thing I could be out at the mall. I've had women hit me with their purses as they walk by. I've had people sneer, call me names. A couple of guys wanting to fight me. Oh, at my high school reunion in 2001, it was before 9/11. Carol and I went to, and I have a picture of the two of us at the reunion. But anyway, um, I was well known, of course. I mean, I was absolutely well known in high school. I was on the soccer team, the gymnastics team, National Honor Society. I played in the rock band I told you about. I don't think there was anybody in school that didn't know who I was. So when all this happened in the 80s and all that, word got around, of course, and I was on the front cover of People magazine and New York, all this stuff, all the big stuff. And so I go to the reunion pre-meeting, and they have one of the magazines with my picture on the front. And so I know they all know. But they by and large, everybody treated me well. But there were two guys who, during the reunion itself, came up to me and they started harassing me. Um, they wanted to fight me is what they wanted to do. And not to brag, but I told both of these guys, I said, and these were high school buddies at one time, and I said, "Look, guys, I've been in the Army for, at that time, it was 21 years, no, 23 years, 24 years, something like that. And I've been a police officer. I know how to take care of myself. You really don't want to go here." And we would have gone to blows, but one of my friends who actually set the reunion up came over and yelled. It was a lady, very nice lady, yelled at them and told them to leave me alone. But that's just the kind of stuff I run into. Yeah. Okay, they're going to cut us out here, so let's leave before I can't upload this. Keep your eyes on the horizon, your ears to the ground, situational awareness on high. You see what they're trying to do to us. This balloon fiasco was absolutely uncalled for unless there's another agenda. I think there is. Don't know what it is, but I don't think it's good. And we just have to pray and stay out of the way, okay? Thanks for being here. I know this has been long tonight, almost 2 hours. Seems like they always give me this notice interrupting the connection to say, "Hey, buddy, you better get off." Happens all the time, right at the same time slot. So I'm pretty sure it's not just an inadvertent interruption in the band. Okay, everybody, thanks for everything. We'll see you next time. All right, out here.